Okay, so here we go. This is chapter 20, and I have a handout for you. It is posted on Blackboard if you need to get this, and if you're just walking in, grab one of these copies. This is on the lymphatic system. We've just finished up with cardiac system, cardiovascular system. We finished up with blood, as much as we're going to cover. And the lymphatic system is really a nice place to go next. This is chapter 20 from your Martini textbook. And we'll talk about how the lymphatic system interacts with your cardiovascular system, specifically the blood vessels. Now, many of you, who in here has already had micro? Raise your hand. Okay. And who has not had micro? I guess the rest of you. So there's a lot of you who have not had micro, and that's fine. This story will actually be continued for you in micro. And I'm stopping this story more at the anatomical point. I want to make sure you understand the lymphatic vessels. I want to make sure you understand the basic functions of the lymphatic system. But when it comes to the specifics of how different immune responses are responsible for killing off bacteria and viruses, that story I'll leave for Mr. Kendall and company in the microbiology department. So there's no reason for me to go over all that. You'll get that at some point. Most of you, I assume, will at some point be taking micro, and if you're not, you'll pick this up in other places along the way. Just to mention about the exam again, Hillary was out sick today, but the exam went well overall. I was pleased with the distribution and the overall average on the exam. It was on par with the other exams, and there are only a few students who are struggling. Honestly, most students are doing okay, and the ones who are struggling need to come see me a little bit. So come talk to me. Let's figure out a different strategy and to be successful on the exams and how to better prepare for these. The 3 quiz grades were pretty strong, the quizzes going into it, and I did not go back yet and make an analysis to see if maybe low quiz grades were a predictor of not doing well on the exam, or maybe some people blew off the quizzes altogether and therefore weren't as prepared for the exam as others. I'll make that analysis later in the week. But please make sure you're doing the assignments and doing the quizzes. All that's there to help you do better in this material. I may also, I have not put out your mastering assignments yet for this next exam. But the next exam, let's take a look at the syllabus. We'll cover chapter 20 over lymphatic system. I'm a whole lecture behind, basically. So lecture 20, or chapter 20 on lymphatic system. That'll be today's conversation. And then we'll go into some digestive. And I have 2 presentations planned for digestive system. We know a little bit about the stomach, but where I'm really going to focus is on the liver, because the liver is one of those structures that kind of we flew over the liver mostly in 105. I want to make sure we hone in a little bit on the liver and the functions and the structures of the liver. And we'll talk a little bit about the pancreas as well. Although we've already pretty much covered the pancreas from the endocrine side of things, we will talk about the exocrine side of the pancreas and a little bit about the gallbladder, which simply stores the bile from the liver. And then we'll go on and talk about some of the physiological responses and mechanisms responsible for the digestive system. And that should not be totally unfamiliar. Again, the anatomy of those systems, I'll expect you to already recall from 105, but we'll go into more of the physiology of that. And then this next exam will also include respiratory system. So for those of you who are going to the respiratory therapy program, this content on the respiratory system should be, hopefully, something that really turns you on, or you're in the wrong place. So we'll be talking about the respiratory functions and some of the important things that are important for the respiratory system and all of you as healthcare professionals. That will bring us up to the next exam on Tuesday, the 7th of April. And I want to get your feedback right now. How did you like having that review session last week? Was that helpful overall? And would you want to do the same type of thing? But in order to do the review session means I'm going to have to pre-record and have you do some things in advance, right? So that we have some space in the schedule to pull together a review session. What do you think about that? I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Was that an okay thing? I know I'm adding some weight to you or some work to do for you outside of class, but I think, hope, assume, all those words that I'm never quite sure about, that overall it'll work out okay. So I'd like to do that. I'd like to be able to have a review session. So what I might do, honestly, thinking very quickly in my head right now, respiratory is something that's very, very important. critical. I want to give those presentations to you in person. The digestive, not quite as heavy, not quite as difficult, more straightforward. I may just put the digestive talks on autoplay, right, on YouTube. So what I probably will do, will jump to respiratory next. And what that will allow us to do is to focus on the respiratory, and then somewhere in all that I'll get the digestive talks put on film and post all that. And that will allow us then on Thursday, so if I talk respiratory on this coming Thursday, talk about respiratory again next Tuesday, leave that next Thursday, and leave next Tuesday, leave Thursday as a review session, right? A week from Thursday would be a review session? Yeah, that would work, wouldn't it? So I'm one lecture behind, and I've got to make up a lecture, so we'll have all things digestive online. I will put a couple of quizzes out there. Some of you asked me about the quizzes. Almost there. Some people have asked me about the quizzes. I told you that there would be more than 10 quizzes in the course. 10 would count, and a couple extras would be coming your way. So if you missed a quiz or didn't do well on a quiz, you would have that grace to replace it with a lower grade. So far, have there been 6 quizzes? 7? 6 or 7 quizzes? So I've got to get a couple more quizzes into your hands. There will definitely be a quiz over digestive. There will definitely be a quiz over lymphatic. There will be a quiz over respiratory. Okay, there will be 3 quizzes related to this exam. I'll try to roll them out sequentially. And then there will be 2 extra credit quizzes. These extra credit quizzes will be over things that are completely open book, open resource, and I'll put those out there pretty soon, and I'll tell you more about those. Ideally, what I'd like to do is have 12 or 13 quizzes. The top 10 scores count. 3 quizzes, we throw out. In addition, there will be some extra credit quizzes. So these will be in addition. They'll be true bonus quizzes. If you do them, great. If you don't do them, no penalty. Only added points to your point total. And so each of those quizzes will be worth 10 points. That's a 1% bump in your grade. So by doing these 2 bonus quizzes, you could get as much as a 2% bump in your overall grade. I'll tell you more about those, and I'll put those together for you soon. Case study number 2. I put them out there. Did I put out a deadline, or did I put out a due date? April 17th. Is that what syllabus says, or did I say something in the email? That's what the syllabus says. Now, this week, I'm going to suggest something to you, and you as adult learners can figure this out. This week in lab, there's a few new things to cover, right? You've got EKGs to review, you've got a few things to look over, but for the most part, most of you have gotten much of the lab content done. And you may find that there's some extra time in lab this week to at least powwow if you're doing your case studies in your lab group, and try to at least assign what you're going to do. I think if you just spend 15 minutes in a group discussing who's going to do what for the second case studies, that will go well. I hope to have those graded back to you by next week, certainly before you do any significant work on your second case study, so that if there were any issues, that you can resolve them and fix them. So the second one, I'm hoping the first one for full credit, but if there are any issues, you'll know what to fix for the second one. So that's coming your way. So you'll have a couple bonus quizzes. You're going to have the 2 case studies. Those should be very strong scores. You're going to have your mastering points coming your way. So as long as you've been doing your mastering homework assignments, that will all come your way at the end as, quote, bonus, or at least a grade boosting thing. Some of you are getting a little bit nervous about your grade. I understand. We've got about 4 more weeks of lecture. And in those 4 weeks, we're going to have 2 exams. We're going to have exam number 4 and, quote, the final exam in finals week. So we have about 4.5 weeks left, about 2 weeks to an exam, and then 2 weeks to an exam, and we're done. And there's still a lot of points to be earned. There's 2 exams. There's 2 lab exams still next week, and the 3rd and final lab exam. There are both of your case studies that have not been graded. There's still your lab report that hasn't been graded, most of you. So there are a lot of points coming your way. I understand the angst, right, as far as grades. So get with me if you're concerned at all. Question?
Like you do that in 105, I think. At the end, you open up everything else.
At the end of the semester or before each test?
At the end of the semester.
If you'd like that, talk to me about why you would want that. But yeah, sure, I can make things available to you.
Okay. I was just wondering.
Question, I've been ignoring you purposefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any way that you can space out at the mastering and not have them all in 1 week like last week?
Okay.
A little bit?
Well, I can do that. I appreciate the feedback. There's two different mentalities here, right? One is put them all at the end and have them do all at the end. And what do I see about the night before the exam? A lot of them aren't done and everyone's rushing through them, right? Or what I tried to do last time was kind of roll them out more sequentially. There's pros and cons both ways. Would you rather just have all the assignments due before the exam, and as big people, you decide when you're going to do them and make sure they're done before the exam? Yes?
Yep.
Or does it help you to be forced to do them in a sequential? Go ahead.
Open it as soon as we take an exam for the next.
Yeah.
It's like we said all weekend with nothing to do.
Sure, good point, good point. So
I like being able to start on the next.
start on the next exam even before we talked about it. Sure. So what I'll do is I'll get busy putting everything together. I'll make it due on the 6th or so of April so that you have had a chance to get everything done before the exam, and that'll be fine. I appreciate the feedback. So I will definitely do that for you. I'll work on getting that done probably definitely by tomorrow. I'll have some of it, and by the end of the week I'll have the rest of it. So you have something to do very soon. Okay, fair enough? Is that will be the quizzes as well? Do you prefer the quizzes all just do at the end? Or do you like them?
Will they be opened up? Like when we're done going through lymphatic, you'll open up whatever quiz and have it due, or the homework, you'll open that up so we can work on it rather than have it all open?
Well, the homework would ideally be done before the quiz, right? Okay.
But like last time, I don't know. Maybe I'm-
Well, here's the negative side, okay? So I can put everything at the end. The negative side is you don't have as much time to review the answers. So if everything's due at the end, I'm not going to give you the answers to the quiz until everyone has taken it, right? That's not reasonable. So that's the negative side. By rolling out the quizzes, okay, do one now, do one in 5 days, do another one in 5 days. Once the deadline is passed, you can go back and review your answers. So you're not humping quite as much at the end, worrying about, okay, what did I do? What didn't I get done? What did I miss on 3 chapters worth of material? So that's the pros and that's the con, right? If I give it to you sequentially, you get it done, it pushes you along, you have more time to review those things one at a time. If they're all due at the end, human nature tells me that we kind of procrastinate and we wait to the end and, right. So I'm hearing both sides. I'm hearing, if I say one thing, I'm hearing the other side, right? But can we have all the answers? So that's the trade-off. I'll definitely, though, get something going for you so you have something to start working on lymphatic. And like I said, we'll do respiratory face-to-face, and we'll do the digestive pre-recorded so that you can move ahead a little bit, and we'll have that review session on a week from Thursday. Fair enough? Any other housekeeping from me to consider or address?
Did we say when the case studies?
Yeah, case study, the 17th, we'll keep it there. Keep it on the due date, that's in the syllabus, that'll be fine. That's plenty of time. But I still think you can knock out a lot of it in your groups this week, perhaps if you're using your lab groups, and that will get you a good start. Okay, let's take a look at the lymphatic system. Yes, ma'am? No, it's still the 7th. Okay, got to keep, I can't bump the final exam, so we got to make up for it. So I'm going to make up for it by doing 2 lectures. I'm behind 1 week and bumping ahead by 1, so we had the review session.
We choosing from the same?
Same idea. There'll be 2 sets. They're already there. They've been there for a while. There's 2 sets. Same idea. You'll choose one from the first set, one from the second set. They're kind of set up by systems, and the same idea. So as a group of 3 or 4 people, determine amongst yourself how you're going to divide up the work. Compare your answers. Submit it as one thing as a group. Yes?
When are we gonna get the first ones back? 'Cause I was.
I just said that a few minutes ago. I'll have them back to you within the week so that you can make any adjustments necessary. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the lymphatic system. What do we know? Again, if you had me for 105, the lymphatic system, if you recall, was a system that was on the, quote, take-home exam, and one that we never actually discussed. If you took 105 more recently, we did at least, in one of the labs, introduce to you the structures of the lymphatic system. But that's all we did, right? We didn't really talk about any specifics or how it interacts with any other body system. You should appreciate that the word lymphatic system is highly coordinated with our immune system, but the immune system is not one of our, quote, body systems, right? It is sort of a global idea. Your skin's part of your immune system. It helps keep out bacteria. A lot of things are part of your immune system. But the lymphatic system is probably the one body system that is most aligned with your body's ability to fight off infection. So what do you know? What structures, just popcorn out some ideas. What are the structures that, when I say lymphatic, come to mind? Spleen. Remember we saw the spleen in the fetal pigs even last semester. There's that little long, flappy, tongue-looking structure next to the stomach. We didn't do anything with it. We just said, oh, there it is. It has nothing to do with digestive system, but it shows up right next to the stomach, so it's always included on the digestive models and in the digestive dissection. What else besides spleen? Thymus. What's the thymus? Where is it? Thymus is up in the mediastinum. It's on the superior border of the heart. As adults, it's very involuted. It's not a very big structure at all. It's a much bigger deal in infancy, and we'll talk about that today. So we got the spleen. We've got the thymus. What else is involved in the lymphatic system? Not the gallbladder. The gallbladder is simply doing what? Collecting bile from the liver, squirting it out when needed. It has really no function for immune system. It's more digestive. What else?
Lymphatic vessels.
Lymphatic vessels.
Lymphatic ducts.
We'll see those lymphatic vessels are intertwined with our capillaries. We know a little bit more about capillaries, so we'll see how those things are connected. Lymph nodes, right? Lymph nodes are going to be these little lymphatic islands, if you will, that are spread out through our body in some predictable places, but also found pretty much everywhere. Anything else come to mind? Tonsils, yeah, absolutely. The tonsils, a couple different pairs of tonsils in your oral cavity and nasopharynx area that we'll also at least mention. So yeah, we got the right idea. And what I want you to know is basically what are the major components of the lymphatic system, know where the vessels are and what they're doing, and how they're interacting with your cardiovascular system. And then, what's this thing called lymphedema? Edema, swelling, but related to a blockage or an abnormality within the lymphatic system. We'll also be looking a little bit at lymphocytes. Well, you know lymphocytes simply as a cell with a big nucleus, kind of looks like a googly eye, right? An eyeball looking at you. But we'll look a little bit more carefully at T cells and B cells, just to introduce the story, just to get a big idea of these different types of lymphocytes. And then we'll look at the lymphoid tissues. We'll look at the flow of lymph through the body, and we'll look at the thymus a little bit. We'll look at the spleen a little bit. And that'll be pretty much the content that we'll be covering from this chapter. Further on in the book, you'll see some greater detail about eosinophils and other cells within the immune system, and we're just not going to go there. We'll leave, like I said before, we'll leave that story to be focused on in the microbiology side of things. So we've already said that the lymphatic system and the organs and the tissues involved here are largely related to immunity. Right? It's a big part of this, but there's also a very important interrelationship between your lymph and your plasma. They are essentially the same thing. When you hear someone say the interstitial fluid, where is your interstitial fluid? It's the fluid found where? Outside of the bloodstream, in between your cells of your tissues. It's all that interstitium, all that space outside in your tissues, and there's a certain amount of fluid that is found there. And we'll see how that fluid, that interstitial fluid, you could also call it the extracellular fluid, right? Oftentimes within the tissues. That fluid is going to be in constant percolation, constant movement and mixing with the bloodstream. And within the lymphatic system, we're going to have, obviously, the cells of the lymphatic system, the lymphocytes. You know them. These are the primary cells of the lymphatic system, and they're invading pathogens. They are checking for abnormal cells, cells that are infected with a virus are targeted as part of being weird, and your body tries to get rid of those virus-infected cells. Your body's also going to try to get rid of any kind of cancer cells, cells that are basically have an antenna up saying something's different about me, and the immune system, the lymphocytes will target those, as well as foreign particles or proteins made by bacteria, or even the toxins that bacteria can produce. So these cells, these lymphocytes, are looking for these abnormal things, right? We certainly don't want bacteria or viruses or toxins or cancer cells taking up residence in our body. So these lymphocytes are specifically designed to find, attack, identify, and destroy these abnormal cells. The lymphocytes are surrounded by lymph, right? Interstitial fluid, by the fluid in and around your lymphatic vessels and in and around your cells. So in a very simplistic way, there are some lymphocytes. Would you recognize that as a lymphocyte? Lymphocytes are agranulocytes, right? We don't see any granular structures here. They have a very large, dark staining nucleus. Very little cytoplasm is visible. That's how you're going to recognize them. And I recall that that went pretty well. You were expecting it, I hope, on the last test, and you did pretty well on the blood cell identification portion in that table. So these are agranulocytes, and they'd be floating in a sea of lymph, if you will, right? So this would be sort of the environment in which these lymphocytes find themselves. Now, the lymphatic vessels are sometimes called the lymphatics, just in general, and they are going to be in your peripheral tissues, in all of your tissues. That's where they're going to begin, and they're going to end at connections into your veins. What this might suggest to you as you think about this is that your lymphatics are starting peripherally, right? They're starting toward the outside, and we're going to see that this lymphatic fluid is all going to be picking up fluid at the capillaries. I need you to go back to capillary land. What happens in a capillary? Let's think about this before we go on. Picture your normal capillary. Blood's coming in from one side. Arterial coming in. I'm just going to draw all this as a capillary bed. And then what happens on the other end? It all drains into a venule, right? Into a small vein. What is it that happened in the capillary? What are the activities that happened in a capillary?
Fluid, nutrient exchange.
Nutrient exchange, gas exchange, hormone exchange, everything that exchanges, right? And what did we learn? What happens at the proximal end of a capillary bed? What is happening there? Fluid, nutrients, plasma is all being what? Pushed out of the capillaries into the interstitial fluid, isn't it? Into the interstitial space. That's pushing nutrients out, that's pushing fluid out. Anything that's in the blood that's small enough to get through those capillary spaces is going to be pushed out. What does not get out here? Protein, right? Remember, proteins normally don't get out here. So the water's pushed out, and in your normal capillaries, at the distal end, what happens?
Fluid comes back in.
Fluid comes back in. And about 85%. So somewhere in the depths of our talking about capillaries, about 85% of all the fluid that gets pushed out in the capillaries will be reabsorbed. And we talked a little bit about the pressures that do that. There's hydrostatic pressure that's pushing the blood into the capillary bed, that pushes it into the interstitium. But there was also, what was the opposing force that pulled it back in?
Blood, colloid, osmotic pressure.
Oncotic pressure, right? And what that really refers to are the proteins. So as long as there's plenty of proteins in your plasma, solute suck, as we remember from Biology 105, so those proteins are solutes and they're sucking the water back in at a rate of about 85%. Where does this 15% of fluid go? Right? If 15% of the fluid is staying behind in the capillary bed area, that plasma, right, it's fluid from the blood, that plasma now is going to be called interstitial fluid. And that interstitial fluid is going to be picked up by lymphatics. And it's going to make its way back to the cardiovascular system. This is one big cycle. So now we appreciate, as a reminder, I hope, where does this fluid come from? Right? It's fluid that's leaving the capillary bed, that is not reabsorbed on the distal end and is necessary to supply the lymphatic vessels with this fluid. Does that seem like a reasonable thing to remember? Okay, where is this fluid coming from, this interstitial fluid or this lymph? It's really just plasma. Now, where are the other organs? We mentioned the spleen quickly. We mentioned the lymph nodes. The lymphatic tissues are scattered throughout the body. And they're scattered throughout the body in places that I can at least argue make sense to me. Where are the places where bacteria or viruses could most easily enter the body? So there are going to be a lot more of the lymphoid tissues at those entry places. We're going to break the lymphoid tissues into two groups, primary and secondary. The primary lymphoid tissues are simply the ones where the lymphocytes themselves are formed. You know where this is. Where are all where are all blood cells produced? In the bone marrow, right? So that's no exception to the lymphocytes. They are also made there. So this is going to include the red bone marrow. Okay? Red bone marrow where hematopoiesis is occurring, where blood cells are being made. We're also going to include the thymus gland there, and we'll talk more about the thymus. Remember, it is much more important in the development of the cells in a young person. The secondary lymphoid tissues or organs are going to be where the lymphocytes then travel. They're going to leave from the bone marrow, they're going to travel through the body, and they're going to be, quote, activated or copied, cloned, if you will. What's a clone, right? Clone is simply a exact copy. So clone, some of your cells, some of your immune cells will be cloned, or exact copies of them will be made. These secondary organs include the ones we've already mentioned: lymph nodes, the tonsils, a couple of different sets of tonsils, the appendix, oh, we didn't say that before, and the spleen, and something called MALT. Does anyone recall what MALT is? Anybody recall what MALT is? Mucosa associated lymphatic tissue. And this MALT we're going to see scattered in a few places, and depending upon what part of the body it's in, sometimes it's called BALT with a B, sometimes it's called GALT with a G, sometimes it's called SALT with an S, but it's all some sort of tissue-associated lymphatic tissue. BALT, B, would be in the bronchioles. So we're going to see that there's some of this MALT-like material in the epithelial linings of the bronchioles. We're going to see that along the gut, there's GALT. It's the same thing. It's just MALT. It's mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. Where are organisms more likely to get into your body? Through breathing and through your oral cavity, going down into your lungs, going down into your stomach and your intestines, right? So along your intestines and along your bronchioles, there are going to be little patches of lymphatic tissue. These are not whole-blown organs. They're just scattered pieces of tissues that have lymphatic function, and depending upon where they are, they have a different name. The general name is mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. If it's in the bronchioles, we'll see BALT. If it's in the gut, we'll see GALT. Don't be thrown off by it. They're just telling you it's sort of specific location. So this is hopefully what you feel comfortable with, if you will, identifying the anatomical structures. There's a couple things on here that I know I never emphasized in the past. But you want to definitely know where the anatomical structures are related to the lymphatic system. So the system organs are over here on the right-hand side, the tonsils, the thymus. It always looks like a strangely located thyroid gland. Right? If you looked at it sort of in isolation, it always looks like the artist oops, and they made a mistake, and the thyroid gland that should be up in the throat has dropped down into the chest. That's not a mistake. That's the thymus. We'll only see it when we're talking about lymphatic structures. The spleen, we know, is over by the stomach. This mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, again, you'll find it along the digestive, the respiratory, even in the urinary systems. The appendix, you know, that's coming off from the cecum, and the bone marrow itself, because that is where all of these cells are being produced. And then the vessels are spread out throughout the body. These are green-looking blood vessels, green being the universal color for the lymphatic system. And this is not just bad coloring. It looks like a series of veins, doesn't it? Okay, it's kind of spread all over the place. They're going to be, though, they're going to be dead ends. They're going to take fluid from your periphery. I told you they start in the periphery. So they start in the distal ends of your hands and your feet, and all these lymphatic vessels are going to be collecting that fluid that got left behind by the capillaries. And that fluid is then going to start migrating. That fluid is going to start migrating back toward the central veins that we'll see, and we'll see how it all comes back together. And along those lymphatic vessels, what little node-like structures are there? Little knot-like or node-like structures. Then you see a bunch of lymph nodes. So along the way, as this fluid is percolating through and returning back, it is housing some of these lymphocytes in the lymph nodes. Now the lymph nodes are sort of where you would expect them to be. There's going to be a large number or larger concentration of these lymph nodes in the inguinal region, making good use of space, thinking about how could things enter into the urethra, okay, or into the vagina, or into the anal region. Then we've got a large number of lymph nodes up in the cervical region, around the neck, helping to protect things coming through the oral cavity. There's also a fair number of lymph nodes in the axillary region. Think for both male and female, but for female especially, just think the breast is an opportunity for milk to come out, but also for infection to set in. So I always think about, where do we find these lymph nodes? We find them in the areas where infection is potentially able to enter the body. So we've got some in the neck, we've got some axillary lymph nodes that are around the breast, we have inguinal lymph nodes around the urethra, the urogenital openings. Cancer cells, right, love to spread through lymphatic vessels. And this is why, when you look at something like this, we're going to see, when I look at the respiratory system later on, and when we talk about the lymph nodes, there are a lot of lymph nodes coming through and around the lungs. And that is why, when a person has a tumor, maybe in the kidney, that those tumor cells from the kidney will oftentimes metastasize and go to the lung. They seem to go to places where they have an easy way of getting there. So they travel through the lymphatics and they show up there. Or that's why lung cancers oftentimes will metastasize to the bone, or they will metastasize to the brain. Again, there's a lot of lymphatic vessels. So when the cancer evades the immune system, when the lymphocytes are not able to destroy the cancer cells and they are able to be in large enough number to set up shop, then we can have metastatic cancer. And oftentimes it's spreading through the bloodstream, but oftentimes also through the lymphatics. So make sure you know the structures of just the anatomical structures of the immune system and these lymphatic structures. Questions so far? Anything just in general? I want to get us to be thinking about this overall system. It's not one that we've spent a lot of time in 105 talking about. I want to kind of get your frame of reference in the right place. Anything at all?
Do men have different or different amounts of lymph nodes due to the different?
As far as I know, the axillary lymph nodes are also, there's still a higher percentage of lymph nodes in the axillary region in men and women. Yeah. So that's the one I have the hardest, it's the one, okay, why do men have a bunch of axillary lymph nodes? Right? But they're there. But it's a good thought. So what are these lymphatic vessels doing? They're carrying lymph, aka the interstitial fluid, from your tissues back toward your venous system. So all this fluid is going to drain back into your veins. So back to my horrible drawing. When I showed you the little capillary, and I said 85% of the fluid comes out, or 100% of the fluid comes out, 85% of it gets reabsorbed into the capillaries itself. What I didn't show in there is that closely associated with that capillary bed would be lymphatic vessels. And they're kind of just sitting there open. and that fluid is then going to enter into those lymphatic vessels and carry back toward the venous system. So the network of lymphatic vessels is going to start with some open-ended lymphatic capillaries. They are right there with the capillaries that you know and love and can picture in your head. They're pretty much found everywhere. They're all over the place. They're in close proximity with your blood capillaries, and they're going to be collecting this interstitial fluid or this lymph, same thing, into and carrying it back toward your larger lymphatic vessels. So just like small venules into medium-sized veins, into large veins, same idea. Lymphatic capillaries into larger capillary beds or larger capillary structures as we go back toward the venous system. So here we see the red and blue that we know so well. In this situation, we're looking at blood flow in this direction, and we see blood coming down into the medarterial, that little branch into the capillary bed. We can appreciate the gas exchanges happening here because we're seeing red going to blue, but there's a lot of fluid that's moving out into the interstitium, right, into the space around the capillary bed. These are microscopic. They're everywhere. Keep in mind, every stinking cell in your body has to have direct or nearly direct access to blood, oxygen, nutrients, hormones. So we're talking microscopic. It's almost difficult to imagine how microscopic this is. But we're talking about capillaries are only about 10 microns in diameter, and a red blood cell is 7.5. So we're talking microscopic vessels here, and in this microscopic world, you've got fluid moving out into the interstitial tissues and being picked up by these green lymphatic vessels. And they're just kind of in this arrangement, this maze. They're all over the place. They're completely interacting one with another. What does that tell you? That 15%, right, that 15% of fluid that gets left behind is now going to enter, as you see the arrows, into the lymphatic capillaries, which will then merge and go toward larger lymphatic vessels. Notice though that these are dead ends, right? You never think of your arteries or your veins as being dead ends. They're not. There's a circle, right? There's a cycle or a circular, right, closed system. That's what I'm trying to say, a loop system of your arteries and veins. Notice though that your capillaries, your lymphatic capillaries are open-ended, little dead ends, right? They're just sitting there and they're sucking up, if you will, that fluid. Now what if, I'm getting ahead of myself, but what if for some reason the lymphatic vessels get blocked? That could be through disease, that could be through an infection, that could be through physical blockage, but imagine what's going to happen to the tissue if that 15% of fluid that gets left behind in the capillaries is not being pulled away by these capillaries of the lymphatic system. Fluid will begin to accumulate. And then we'll have what I refer to as lymphedema. Lymphedema is a special type of edema because the lymphatic vessels are blocked. It could be a surgical problem where they've actually damaged the vessels during a surgical procedure. It could be from trauma, it could be from tumor, it could be from disease, it could be from infection. There are lots of reasons why the lymphatic vessels can be blocked and why lymphedema would be the result of that blockage. We'll talk more about that. Now, these capillaries, I've already said this, are different from blood capillaries in that they're not continuous tubes. They are little pockets, or little dead ends, little cul-de-sacs, if you will, that come down and interact with the fluid of the capillaries. They have a large diameter. They're very thin-walled. They really are more like fenestrated or even discontinuous capillaries in that there are big open spaces. This is going to allow a lot of molecules to enter in here, and they're very flattened or irregular when you are looking at a sectional view. If you could imagine them at all, they won't have quite the structure. They're not going to be quite as structurally intact as your normal continuous capillaries. They also have some overlapping endothelial cells. We wouldn't have seen that before, would we? In normal capillaries, we see just a nice layer, single layer of squamous cells making up the endothelium. This overlapping region and these thinner walls and these discontinuous areas are going to allow the influx of fluid. Now, there is another place that we'll mention about the lymphatics when we get to the digestive system. But when you're eating, in your digestive system, most of your fats are not directly absorbed into your bloodstream through the SI, through the small intestine. You have lacteals, right? Part of this lymphatic system. We'll come back to it when we get to the digestive system. That's all going to be part of this unit, right? Digestive, respiratory, lymphatic. We're going to see that there are proteins and some fats that are absorbed into your lymphatic system and how that all comes back to connects with one another. Those larger spaces are allowing proteins and fats, but also viruses, bacteria, cancer cells. Like I said, cancer cells love to spread and travel through your body through the lymphatics. And so can bacteria get in there, and so can viruses. In fact, you want that. Because as these abnormal cells, bacteria, viral, or cancer cells get into lymphatic vessels, where are they heading? As they're picked up by these lymphatic capillaries, those cells are now traveling toward a lymph node, as you're going to see. And the lymph node is going to house some of these lymphocytes. And these lymphocytes, these cells, are going to have the ability to destroy the bacteria, or destroy the virus, or destroy the cancer cell. So we want these lymphatic vessels to be, quote, holy, to have fenestrations, to allow cells to travel through these lymphatic vessels. That's the design. Yes?
Is that why when you have a sore throat, your lymph nodes are swollen?
Wherever you have an infection, your lymphocytes are in overdrive and it will cause inflammation. Absolutely. Heat, more blood flow, more swelling, more fluid. That's all part of, exactly, an infection, lymph nodes being activated in that particular area. So if you've got any kind of swelling of the lymph nodes, you know that there's an infection actively being fought off in that part of your body. So here, again, we just see the idea that these, we see now the fenestrations more in this, or the discontinuous walls. So we see some overlapping of the endothelial cells. That's certainly different than what we saw in normal capillaries. And we see that there's some gaps and spaces, and this easily allows not only fluid to come into the lymphatic vessels, but also larger things like cells, bacteria, viruses, things that would normally not be able to easily move into or out of a capillary. Again, in part because there's a lot of missing basement membrane. A lot of the glue that holds the epithelial cells together is not continuous. Now, remember veins have valves? Okay. So arteries don't have valves, but veins do have valves. And those valves and veins helped keep blood moving back toward the heart since veins are under such low pressure. Well, lymphatic vessels, the larger ones, also have valves. So there's a similarity with veins and lymphatic structures. The valves are located pretty close together, and there's little bulges, if you will, at each valve. And so you'll see what looks like a little series of beads on a string sort of idea when you look at some lymphatic structures, especially in a cartoon representation. The pressure is very, very low in these vessels, because of low pressure, we wouldn't want things to go backwards. And so the valves, just like in the veins, are there to prevent flow going backwards. If it did flow backwards, you would start getting edema again, wouldn't you? You'd have fluid building up at those dead-end cul-de-sacs where the fluid would all be flowing backwards. So those valves are important there. And just like in the skeletal muscle pump that pushed blood through the veins, as you walk and as you move your skeletal muscles, you're also pushing that lymphatic fluid. If you've ever talked to someone post-surgery and had any kind of lymphedema, and then they have to go through any kind of occupational therapy or any kind of lymphedema treatment, they basically will very gently massage along the lymphatic vessels. And all they're trying to do is increase the drainage through this. It's a very gentle massage, but very specific and very directed toward the location of these lymphatics. And that is going to help push that fluid beyond, since there's such low pressure. So again, we see that arteries and veins and lymphatics are traveling, oftentimes as sort of a triad. When you look at this cartoon representation, you notice that the artery and vein are kind of smooth in their texture and in their overall outer coating, but notice how lumpy, bumpy the lymphatic vessels are, again, because there are valves along the way, and those valves create sort of a bulgy appearance. If you looked at a artery, vein, and lymphatic vessel side by side, the lymphatic vessel would be even less impressive than the vein. So the vein, we know, is thinner and less impressive structurally than an artery, and the lymphatic vessel would be thinner yet than a vein. So very, very thin structurally. You can see in this bottom micrograph the valve itself. Do you see that in the middle? Sort of a point. And that's sort of that's the same way that the valves look in the arteries. But once blood's only, or not blood, lymph, right, is only going in one direction. So once it gets going from the left to the right, once it gets past that valve, it's not able to go backwards in a normal, healthy lymphatic system. Now, where are these valves, or sorry, where are these vessels? I've already mentioned to you that you have them in a number of places, but there's a large number of lymphatic vessels in your intestines. And in part, or in large part, because these lymphatic capillaries along the small intestine are called the lacteals. They're like, same thing we just saw a moment ago. It's like this little dead end that reaches up along the blood vessels in the submucosa. Remember that? There's the mucosa of the small intestine. That would be the epithelial layer. Right below that was a bunch of blood vessels. And that layer right below the blood vessels in the gut is called the submucosa, and that's where all the blood vessels are. And as nutrients are absorbed into your gut, we always would say, well, those nutrients are being absorbed into the veins, right, that are right underneath, or the capillaries, right underneath the mucosal layer. Where do those food molecules go? Where do those nutrients go? I'm pulling all this together for what we're going to be talking about the next couple of weeks. But as nutrients are absorbed into your gut and into your bloodstream, they're absorbed into the venous system. And where's the first stop for that blood? From the gut to the... We just brought a bunch of new nutrients in. We want to make sure they're not toxic. We want to, quote, detoxify them. So those nutrients are going to go from the gut through the veins to the liver. Absolutely. Then the liver is going to, quote, detoxify. That's why I want to talk about the liver in depth in a couple days. And then once those molecules have been, quote, detoxified and checked out, make sure there's no problem, then those nutrients are going to open into the general circulation and enter back into the vena cava and then be distributed by the heart through the body. So along with those submucosal veins that are collecting the nutrients, there are also going to be a lot of lymphatic vessels with these little, I'll think of them like little fingers pointing up. Those little fingers pointing up to the lacteals. And as I said a moment ago, lipids are not very well absorbed into your small intestine. They're kind of, quote, too large. They don't get absorbed into the capillaries of your gut. But lacteals, right, lymphatic vessels have bigger openings, so they can accept the larger, chunkier, that's the way I think about it, the larger, chunkier fat molecules, and they are then absorbed into the lacteals. They're going to travel through the lacteal vessels, and eventually, as we're going to see, come back into our general circulation. So the fats get into our body, but not directly into our bloodstream, but first into our lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system works very well with the digestive system. There are some areas that lack lymphatic vessels. They're pretty much everywhere. But there are places that don't have any lymphatic vessels, and that would be the cornea. Well, that makes sense because there's also no blood supply, right? Your cornea is avascular, so there would also be no lymphatics there. And so any place where there's no blood supply, for example, the cornea, would you expect capillaries in your cartilage? Right? Cartilage is also avascular, so there would be no lymphatics, sticking in your hyaline cartilage or your fibrocartilage of the meniscus of your knee. Bone marrow. This is interesting. What is being made in the bone marrow? your blood cells are being made there, and these immune cells are being made there. And so these cells are going to come through the general circulation, but there won't be lymphatic vessels there. And also in the central nervous system. Central nervous system, think about the blood-brain barrier. There's a little bit more control going on in the central nervous system, and these lacteals would kind of wreak havoc there, wouldn't they, a little bit, with these open circulation ideas. So no lymphatics in the central nervous system, none in the bone marrow, and none in tissues that already are avascular. So think about that. Now, the lymphatic vessels, there's two basic locations, superficial and deep. Not difficult. The superficial ones are obviously more toward the surface of your skin. They are going to be found largely around your mucous membranes. So think the mucous membranes that are lining your digestive system, your respiratory system, the urethra and the urinary system, the vagina and the reproductive system. All of those mucous membranes will have superficial lacteals. Areolar, what's that refer to? Areolar was another name for the loose connective tissue. So these lymphatics have to be kind of, well, connected, held together by something. So these lymphatics are in this loose connective tissue layer that's just underneath your mucous membranes. You're also going to find a lot of superficial lymphatics around your serous membranes, and you're familiar with those. Deeper lymphatics are found, as it suggests, down along your deeper arteries and veins, down where your skeletal muscles are helping pumping that lymphatic fluid back through those valves. And all of these, both the superficial and the deep lymphatic vessels, are going to converge to form the lymphatic trunk. So all of this lymphatic fluid is coming up toward the thoracic cavity, and we'll see how it all comes together. So this is just an example. For lymphatic vessels, we have the more superficial lymphatics, more toward the surface in the skin, and then the deep lymphatics going down deep in the muscles, as an example. But all of these are going to be coming back into two large vessels. These are the collection vessels for all of this lymphatic fluid. They're oddly named, I think. One is the thoracic duct. So where is it? It's in the thoracic cavity, right? And the collection of lymphatic fluid is very, very asymmetric. It's really an interesting asymmetry that goes on here. The thoracic duct is going to receive all of the fluid coming in from everything below your diaphragm, so everything from the trunk, everything from both legs, as well as the left side of the body. Kind of a weird thing. You'll see a picture in a moment. All of these lymphatic vessels are merging. They're coming up toward the thoracic duct. Again, this is both of your legs and the left side of your body. And that is all then going to merge into and dump into the left subclavian vein. Can you picture it? You know where your veins and arteries are. So the left subclavian vein is going to be receiving all this fluid. Now, the right lymphatic duct, wouldn't it make sense if there was a left and a right? Right? There isn't. That's what's kind of confusing here. The thoracic duct picks up everything in the legs and the left side. So that kind of is, quote, your left. And then the right lymphatic duct only picks up fluid from the lymphatic vessels coming in from the right side of the superior portion of the body. So from the diaphragm up, and that's going to drain into the right subclavian. So that part's symmetrical, if you will. They're both draining into the subclavians. But clearly the left subclavian would be receiving a lot more fluid, wouldn't it? Because it's receiving everything from the legs and the left side of the body, and the right lymphatic duct is only receiving from the right diaphragm up. So you have this really asymmetric distribution as is shown here. It's not 50-50. Now, I'm always reminded of this. My mother had a cancer that the tumor began to block her right lymphatic duct. And as that tumor began to grow, it started to block and push up against that particular duct. So her symptoms right? She didn't have any respiratory, really any respiratory challenge from the lung tumor, but she started getting incredible edema along her arm and along her chest and the right side of her face. And that was her biggest complaint, was that swelling that they really couldn't do a whole lot about. That tumor was pushing up against that drainage. Of course, she still has blood flow going to her arm. There's still fluid going into her capillaries and escaping into the interstitial space, but that fluid had no way of getting back. And so there's these huge backups and very painful and uncomfortable swelling as a result. Now, this could be a result of a tumor like it was for her, or people who have had a mastectomy and they remove the breast for radical or whatever. That can also interfere with these lymphatic vessels. They just cannot protect, they're so weak, they're so wimpy, they can't necessarily protect the integrity of all the lymphatic fluid. And so a lot of women or men following a mastectomy will also have a lot of damage to their lymphatic vessels and therefore fluid buildup. And you'll see people wearing basically a support stocking on their arm, right? That support stocking is a compressive stocking, and it's helping to coax and keep that pressure down and keep the fluid moving as much as possible. I broke my ankle years ago, one of my many falls from my vestibular problems, and my left ankle is always swollen. So in the surgical repair of the ankle, right, some of the lymphatic vessels were damaged, and so my drainage from the left ankle is always a problem. And so it just seemed to swell up far more than, it's very asymmetric, and is result of damage to thoracic drainage. So any surgical, any tumor, any infection, and I'll show you a picture of an infection in a moment where the thoracic ducts can get blocked as well. There's also at the base of the thoracic duct, this was labeled back on the image of all the lymphatic structures. I didn't introduce it. There's this cisterna. What's a cistern? We saw. Well, what do we see in skeletal in muscle? Sarcoplasmic reticulum. Remember, on each side of the T-tubule, and that was called the cistern, wasn't it? When I think of a cistern, I think of a well, right? A collecting area, if you will. So there's this cistern, and it is at the base of the thoracic duct. This is going to receive lymphatic or lymph from the inferior part of the abdomen, the pelvis, the lower limbs. It's going to be draining into the cisterna by the lymphatic ducts in the inner intestinal trunk. So we're going to see there's a swelling. Let me go back and show this to you. It's right here. You can see it in this picture now. We're seeing in this picture a couple of things. Number one, you're looking at this incredible lymphatic activity in the mediastinum. Lots and lots and lots of lymphatic activity in this area. This stuff would sometimes be called bulked, right? Because it's around the bronchioles and around the trachea. We'll see that labeled later on. But right here you see a swelling. The cisterna is right down here. And what happens is that there's a lot of fluid coming in from some of the lymphatic drainage. And there's a swelling right there at the base near the diaphragm. What else do I want to show you on this? You can see a lot of thoracic lymph nodes. Again, a lot of little nodes along the way throughout the respiratory system. And we'll also be looking at this from a couple of different angles as we go through this. That's what I wanted to show you too. Look at the right lymphatic duct. What vessel is it draining into? Both of the lymphatic, the right lymphatic and the thoracic duct dump into the subclavian, right? And where's the subclavian? Right up above, right before the brachiocephalic and right before the superior vena cava. Right? We know this? We will know this by next week's exam, right? In lab. Because you got some vessels to look at. So we can see now, it doesn't look so massive, but you can see that there's emerging. Here's the thoracic duct coming in and merges into the left subclavian and the right subclavian. You can see it coming in right here. Okay, so lymphatic trunk, the thoracic duct and the right lymphatic duct are going to drain into the subclavians on the same side. I've already mentioned the lymphedema. So again, any time where there's a blockage or an impedance of the flow, then the interstitial fluids will accumulate and become very swollen. This is typically seen in the limbs, lower limbs, and the arm, but it can be, like I said, in the neck or around the head, chest, depending upon where the problem is. It can become permanent. I mean, a little bit of swelling will come back down, and that's really the goal, is to not let it become permanent, but through years, months or years of swelling, the elasticity of the tissues will be compromised, and basically the person will be left with an area that is permanently swollen, aka my left ankle, right? It's not like there's so much fluid there, it's just simply puffier than my right, because after 18 years of being swollen, the tissues around it have given up in their elasticity. That fluid can also be a problem in that you can have, I mean, this interstitial fluid is also percolating. You're trying to get rid of toxins. You're trying to get rid of infection. And so these areas of swollen lymphedema can become a stagnant pool of toxins or a stagnant pool of bacteria, right, that would normally have been picked up and gotten rid of. And so blocking the lymphatic tissues can be more than just a problem with the immune system or with swelling, but can also overwhelm the immune system in that localized area. This is an example of elephantiasis. So this is a person's foot, and this is usually a result of a filarial worm infection. So in some parts of the developing world, there are parasitic infections. And these parasitic infections, like Monsters Inside Me kind of shows, invade into the lymphatic vessels and pretty much shut down the flow of lymphatic fluid. You'll see pictures like this of legs. One leg is normal, and one leg is that of an elephant. That's where it gets its name, elephantiasis. You'll also see images. I don't have one here for you, and I'm reminded, years ago, University of Florida, I took a parasitology course, and that's a course where you learn about all the lovely worms that invade your body. And one of the stock images that's still found in every textbook, I don't think it's in ours, but in most parasitology or biology or microbiology textbooks, there's a picture of a man walking behind a wheelbarrow because his scrotum is sitting in the wheelbarrow. And he has a testicular filarial worm infection, and as a result, his scrotum is the size of a wheelbarrow. And I'll never forget, it was the freakiest thing, one of those freaky things in my life. This student raises her hand and says, "That's my uncle." So she was an international student. I believe she's from the Dominican Republic, but I can't remember for sure. And sure enough, you know, that was her uncle. That picture had been taken, had sort of become a stock picture of the World Health Organization as an example, an extreme example of filarial infections and elephantiasis. And I'll never forget her standing up, and she had never realized, apparently, that her uncle was so famous. But it was really one of those really weird moments, and I'll never forget it. That was probably, 30 years ago, but sitting in a lecture room. And the worst thing, I'm having flashbacks. This is before there was no smoking policies on campus. And the professor who taught this course was just a disgusting man. Once in a while, it'll be like Shamu here in the front row, right? I'll spit a little bit. It's not intentional. Please don't take it personally. He was a cigar smoker and would smoke his cigar all the way through the lecture. And he was also a hacker, so he was just disgusting. And this was a room of about 250 people. And there were, theater seating up and doors in the back. And literally there'd be this cloud of smoke over the top of the room. And you had to either sit way down in front to be below the smoke zone and put up with the spitting, or be way up outside the back door. I mean, there was always a crowd of students sitting outside the lecture room trying to listen in because they refused to go in. It was one of those really, Anyway, but not only was he a disgusting person, honestly, he really was. He was just gross. He talked about gross things, right? So it was a perfect match. So hopefully, 20 years from now, you won't tell about this anatomy professor who was really disgusting and spit on you in the front row. So that's the big idea, right? We got these lymphatic fluids. They're draining from the lymphatic capillaries. I haven't talked about the lymph nodes yet, but along the way, they're going to be passing by lymphatic tissues like lymph nodes and MALT, and they're draining eventually back into your left and right subclavian veins and back into your general circulation, and around the cycle goes, right? So the fluid is all the same. Interstitial fluid, AKA plasma, just depends upon where it's found. Questions, thoughts, concerns so far?
When someone has like that picture of the foot, like do they amputate or do anything, or is that like their whole body or one part?
It can be very, very systematic. If that'd be a good place to go. Let's do that for a moment. Let's look at some pretty pictures, shall we? So, I know if I look up elephantiasis, we're going to find some lovely images. I don't want a video. Let's just do an image, okay? So here's examples, right? So we're looking at individuals, you know, something like this, right? There's an issue in lymphatic drainage to the testes. Here you can see both ankles are rather affected, but here's a normal leg, right, next to a very swollen leg. So I suppose, I mean, I don't know enough about it to know here's a healthy leg, here's elephantiasis. I don't know enough to know if you would think, right, look at this leg. You would think that amputation would be the simple solution, but, you know, let's keep in mind the ramifications of amputation too. So sometimes they're able to clear the infection and with Western medication, right, with some antiparasitics, but that's not always possible. I'm trying to find that stock picture. That's interesting. Jay Leno has an elephantiasis chin, whatever. Yeah, look at this. Some of these are just horrible, right? Horrible, horrible, horrible. So we don't see this in this world. If we had a parasitic infection, we would go get some treatment and all would be well. I'm not seeing the stock picture that I recall of this guy pushing a wheelbarrow, but you can imagine. It was a rather disturbing picture. And these are the worms, right? These are the worms that get up into, and here's some lymphedema of the face, right? So it doesn't have to be just of the extremities. And here are the worms, right? These long worms, they get up and they just preferentially grow up into these filarial worms, love to go up into the lymphatics, and that's where they hang out. They block the flow, swelling occurs, and it is a rather overwhelming infection, as you can see. If they can catch it early enough, they can get rid of those worms, I know, through parasitic drugs. But I think at some point, there's so much damage done to those vessels, and they're so overwhelmed with worms, and they've structurally destroyed the lymphatic vessels, that I don't know that even trying to cleanse of the worms would be that effective in repairing or restructuring the lymphatic structures. So I think at some point, you know, it's so bad that it wouldn't recover on its own. I would say do a short paper on it, but that's 105, right? So, okay. So you get the idea. Lovely pictures. Always fun to look at. Yeah. Yeah, fun pictures. Have some fun. Look at those later. Okay. Elephantiasis, or just look up, you know, look up a blocked lymphatic vessels and see what you get. Those are just extreme cases of lymphedema. Okay, so lymphocytes, the cells that are part of this lymphatic system, are about 20 to 40%. You're going to see different numbers. Next week in lab, when you do the blood lab, I believe the normal numbers you're going to be given for lymphocytes is 25 to 33%, but somewhere in this range, right? Somewhere in this 20 to 40% range is how many or what percentage of your lymphocytes, of your leukocytes should be lymphocytes. And most of your lymphocytes are out, quote, in your lymphatic tissues. And there's three basic classes of lymphocytes. There's T cells. T cells, we hear about them. T cells probably became most famous because you know that in HIV infections, the T cell numbers start to drop down and they become too low for the body to fight off infection. And T cells, again, I'm going to tell more of this, let Mr. Kendall and Micro tell more of this story, but 80% of all of your circulating lymphocytes that you see in your blood would be T cells. Then there's a smaller percentage of your cells that are B cells. You cannot tell them apart. You cannot look at a T cell and say that's a T cell or that's a B cell. They all just look like the big googly eye lymphocytes. And these are the cells that make your antibodies. So the T cells are able to directly attack cells and to directly attack foreign antigens. The antibodies produced by B cells, these B cells don't directly attack, but they work through the antibodies. And then there's also NK, or natural killer cells. And they are really a neat cell that are part of your, quote, immune surveillance. NK cells are getting a lot of research in pregnancy. I mean, how is it that a mother, a pregnant woman, is able to keep her immune system from attacking that foreign thing in her uterus? Right? It's a really interesting balance of the immune system, and we now know that the NK cells are helping to establish the baby as being okay. We'll let it stay around here for about 9 months. So the mother's immune system doesn't go in high alert and kill off the baby. So it's a really interesting immunology story when you think about pregnancy and the maintenance of pregnancy. All of these cells are looking for or are sensitive to foreign chemicals. Anything that comes into your body, a toxin, a bacterium, a virus, a funked out cancer cell, anything that is abnormal or not of self is what they're looking at. Now, most of the antigens, right? An antigen is any molecule, but most of the antigens that come into your body are going to be foreign things. They're going to be from a bacterium, from a virus. Sometimes, though, they're most oftentimes they're going to be proteins, but they could be lipids, they could be carbohydrates, they could be nucleic acids, they could be any of the organic molecules that you know about. Now, when those antigens come in, those foreign antigens come into your body, these cells go into high alert and you set up an immunological response. That response is designed to get rid of that thing. Whatever that foreign molecule is, that protein, that lipid, that sugar, whatever it is, the idea is get rid of it. But oftentimes there's a lot of tissue damage that occurs along the way. So not only, like you said, when you have an infection, you get swollen, you get warm, right? It's warm to the touch, you feel a swelling. Well, that swelling can also lead to tissue damage. So sometimes the immune response trying to get rid of that organism or that antigen can cause a lot more damage than you would initially think. So quickly going through these cells. The T cells, there's subcategories of the T cells. And I'm not going to go into great detail here. I want you to know that some of the T cells are called cytotoxic T cells. So what can they do? Cytotoxic. They can do what?
Toxins.
They can kill cells, right? They have the ability to attack foreign cells. If a cell gets infected by a virus, it can also kill those, right? So how do you get rid of a virus? You can attack the virus, or you can attack the cell that got infected by the virus. And so these cells can actually go and look for cells that have already been infected by virus and destroy that cell to prevent the spread of more infection.
Do lymphocytes cause cysts? I don't really know what actually causes a cyst, and I'm assuming it has to do with the immune system.
It can. It can be a sort of a little walling off of the immune system in some way, as one example. There's a couple different kinds of cysts. Yeah. What's that? Cytotoxic? Bacteria normally don't invade your cells. They just come in and create havoc. They make toxins and things. And so viruses are usually intracellular. They're going to go into the cell, and the immune system has the ability of not only killing the virus, but going after the cell that is infected. So kill the cells that are infected while saving the rest of the body, kind of idea. Antivirals, yeah, sometimes, and then why do you not, you would never give a person with a viral infection an antibiotic, right, because that's going toward bacteria and this increasing the resistance of our bugs. So, yeah, there's a lot of things going on here. Now, these are the cells that are pretty much what we call cell-mediated immunity. The cell, right, cells that you have already in your body, these T cells, are able to fight off and kill foreign things. There's also also helper T cells. These are the ones that specifically get wiped out in HIV infection. And these guys are helping, right, they're helping, the name tells you, they're helping to keep the T cells working. And there are some suppressor T cells, and these cells are going to help slow down. When you have an immune response, you want it to ramp up, but you also at some point want to turn that immune response down. So you need to have something to activate it and something to sort of slow it down. These inhibitors come along, these inhibiting or suppressor T cells come along and help to slow down the immunological response at the proper time. Then, in addition to the T cells, there are the B cells. And what I want you to know here, again, is that these are the cells that are going to make your antibodies. That's really what I want you to know here. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. These are your antibody-producing cells. The only time I've really talked about antibodies in my 2 semesters here is in blood typing. Remember, in blood typing, antibodies are produced. Those antibodies are produced by the B cells, and those antibodies then can bind to and set up an immunological response. Then there's NK cells, and these cells, again, are attacking foreign cells, foreign infected viral cells, and cancer cells, and they're always monitoring. So what I said, these cells are gaining a lot of interest in the research world in how it is that a woman's immune system is able to maintain a pregnancy without attacking it. So where are all of these cells made? All of these cells are made where? In the bone marrow, and they're all coming from a lymphoid line. Right? The lymphoid line makes all the lymphocytes, and in a greater differentiation of that pathway, some of these lymphocytes become T cells, and some of those lymphocytes become B cells, and some of them become NK cells, the natural killer cells. So just know that these are cytotoxic, helper, and suppressor cells, whereas the plasma cells are the ones making antibody. While here the cartoons make them look different, honestly, looking at the cells in what we'll be doing, you won't be able to differentiate a T cell from a B cell.
Aren't they also made in the thymus as well?
They are made some in the, they mature in the thymus. Okay, so I told you the primary, where did I tell you the primary lymphatic organs were? I told you bone marrow, because that's where they're made, and I mentioned the thymus there in passing. Because the T cells are, although they begin their production in the bone marrow, they do travel to the thymus, and there finish their maturation. So thymus is part of the T cell. That's where they get their name, T cells, because they're involved with the thymus. Lymphocytes are part of lymphopoiesis, right? The making of or the formation of the lymphocytes. You know, like I said, that this is in the bone marrow, and as we were just mentioning, this is also involving the thymus, as well as some of your peripheral lymphoid tissues. The red bone marrow is the primary place, and then the thymus will pick up from there. So as it says, all your lymphocytes start in the bone marrow. One group, however, is going to stay in the bone marrow. Number one is going to go to the thymus. So some of these cells are going to go to the thymus. Others are going to stay in the bone marrow. And there they are going to, quote, develop or mature. The idea here is that, so the T cells go off to the thymus, the other cells go off to the bone marrow cells that stay back here are going to become the B cells and the NK cells. Think about this. As your body is establishing your immune system, at some point, you don't want your body to attack yourself, right? You don't want to set up antibodies that attack your own tissues. You don't want your body to fight off your own things. So there has to be, quote, an education that goes on. And in the thymus, there is a thymic education. What that basically means is that you're only going to make T cells and antibodies that are going to attack foreign things. If in the development of the T cells or in the antibody-producing B cells, they recognize or attack self, they will be destroyed. So in the normal development of your immune system, any cell that is looking like it's going to attack yourself is, in a normal immune system, destroyed. So that the only antibodies you have left circulating in your blood and the only T cells you have circulating in your body are ones directed toward, quote, foreign antigens. All of your self proteins, your self molecules, are not going to be attacked. Now, we know that things go wrong, right? People get autoimmune diseases. And I'll bring that up at the very end of this conversation. I've got a few slides that I skip over a lot of stuff and then I go to the very end. And what can go wrong when the antibodies of your body or the T cells of your body are directed towards self, and they start attacking self, that can lead to things like rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, and there's a whole series of autoimmune diseases that I'm sure you've heard mention of. Basically, that's simply when the immune system goes wrong, when it either in development or in some other trigger starts to attack itself rather than things that are foreign. This has to, in order for this thymic education to occur, there has to be a blood-thymus barrier. Okay, think about that. We talk about the blood-brain barrier. That's a greater division between the blood and the tissues of the brain. But there's also a thymic or blood-thymic barrier. That means that, think about it, if your T cells were exposed to all things self in your blood while the cells are being developed, then there could be more of this problem. So while the T cells are undergoing this education or the selection process, they're going to be separated from the general blood circulation, and that's going to help ensure that they won't react against normal body cells. Most of your T cells are killed. 98% of all of your T cells are killed. Why? Because they would react with self. So this is a school where 98% of the students fail, right? I don't want to go there. Right? So 98% of your T cells, as they're being developed, fail. Only 2% survive, and the ones that survive are the ones that are going to enter into the bloodstream and are going to be looking for foreign antigens to attack virus, bacteria, etc. So this just kind of walks you through this, starting in the bone marrow. Some cells stay there. Those are going to be the B cells and the NK cells. Some cells travel quickly to the thymus, where they become the T cells. That's why they're called the thymic cells. And they're all going to be involved with your immune function. These cells are all going to migrate. So the T cells are going to leave the thymus, the B cells are going to leave the bone marrow, and they're going to maintain their ability to divide. So as you were saying, when you get an infection, your lymph nodes get inflamed. They get swollen. What's happening now is that the T cells have been activated. And when the cells become activated, they make more of themselves. They clone. And they make more of those cells. So if you get, let's say, E. coli, an E. coli infection, it comes into your tissues, you have T cells that recognize E. coli, they're going to attack it. Well, we also want to get more of those cells made that can attack the E. coli. And so those T cells are going to become cloned. There's going to be a greater number of those cells. These cells are all going to rush to the site of infection. That's going to increase the swelling. It's going to increase the warmth because there's more blood flow going to that tissue. And you're going to know that your immune system is fighting something off from that swollen immune response. So that's sort of the big idea. Now, what I want to, I got 2 or 3 minutes here, talk about the lymph nodes. Spread along the lymphatic vessels as this lymphatic fluid is flowing through from capillaries back and merging into the subclavian vein, there are going to be lymph nodes. Basically, this is where there are lymphocytes packed, right? These T cells and B cells hang out in these lymph nodes. So as this fluid is coming through the vessels, it goes by like these guard stations called a lymph node. And in the lymph node, there are these T cells and B cells. And we've already said those T and B cells are designed to fight off foreign things. So if there is a virus, if there is a bacterium, if there is a cancer cell, if there's something wrong or a toxin that's traveling through the lymphatic vessels, it'll run into these lymphatic cells and hopefully will be destroyed. Okay, so we saw where those lymph nodes are formed. Tonsils are the same thing. Your tonsils have a high number of lymphatic cells. Molt, a high number of lymphatic cells. So wherever these lymphatic organs are is where the T and B cells are found in large numbers. I'll say this and then we'll be done. Molt, here it is, right? Molt was mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. It's found in different places and had just different names. In the intestines, you'll also see the term Peyer's patches, named after the dude who described them. But Peyer patches are also found, and you'll see a bunch of lymphocytes hanging out in these places. It makes sense that your gut's going to have a lot of lymphatic tissue because as you eat and drink, many organisms and toxins and viruses are able to make it into your body, and you need to be able to fight them off at their site of their infection. So when we look at the digestive system, I'll bring up these Peyer's patches and Malk again. Tonsils, where are they? We know where the tonsils are? There's 3 kinds. There's pharyngeal tonsils. Those are the adenoids that are in the nasopharynx. There's the palatine tonsils hanging down by the uvula, and the lingual tonsils, we don't really see them very much. They're down by the, as it suggests, down by the tongue. So those are also areas where there's lots of lymphatic cells. I'm not going to ask you about the histology here. You know already where those different tonsils are found. Again, it makes sense, right? As they're coming into the body, a place of extra support. Can you live without your tonsils? Sure, right? Why do kids get their tonsils out? Usually kids. They've had so many recurring infections. That's a good thing. They've been doing their job, right? And it used to be very common after a few infections, lop them out. We're trying now to hold on to our tonsils more because we've realized they're there for a reason. They are helping to reduce infection. But if those swollen lymph nodes in those tonsils are becoming problematic, then they may just lop them out, knowing that your immune system is healthy and strong and will deal with the infection in a different way without causing all the inflammation in the pharynx. So that'll finish up for today. I'll finish up a few more ideas on lymphatic, and we will probably get started with the respiratory. Next time I'll finish up a few things on lymphatic, start with respiratory. We'll get the digestive talks online, and I'll get some homework because some people just want things to do. And I will make that happen, okay? Thank you.